Welcome, everyone, to Alaska Quarterly Review's Reading and Conversation series. This event is being recorded and will begin airing during National Poetry Month on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel. Before we start, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgements. Alaska Quarterly Review gratefully acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous land on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Nienow homeland. Nienow is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land. Land Acknowledgements opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of Indigenous peoples, and marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. And now to begin. This event is a special partnership between Alaska Quarterly Review and the outstanding independent poetry book publisher, Alice James Books. Alice James Books was founded in 1973. Its goal then was to give a voice to women poets whose work was greatly under-recognized. AJB, for short, remains committed to its founder's original mission while expanding upon its scope to include poets of all genders, backgrounds, and stages of their careers, building equity and inclusivity in publishing and in the literary arts, and cultivating greater empathy in our world. Very much like AQR, the press sees the work it publishes as instrumental in driving conversations that help us overcome the barriers, and also work that connects readers to a broad audience and helps them to tell stories that matter. Each of our three readers this evening, Matthew Nienow, Ira Sadoff, and Amy Dryansky, has published poems in both AQR and also a full poetry collection, or more than one, with Alice James Books. Our first reader is Matthew Nienow. Matthew serves on the editorial board of Alice James Books, and he will make a brief remark about this partnership between AQR and the press. Matthew is the author of two full poetry collections published by Alice James Books, House of Water and Nothing, or If Nothing, which is forthcoming from Alice James Books next year, as well as three earlier chapbooks. His poems have appeared in the Georgia Review, the New England Review in Poetry, which awarded him a 2013 Ruth Lilly Poetry Fellowship. He has also received fellowships, grants, and support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Elizabeth George Foundation, Artists Trust of Washington State, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and For Culture of Seattle. Over to you, Matthew.
Thanks so much for the introduction. And before I dive into my poems, I just want to say a little bit about Alice James Books, which, as Ron said, is a truly remarkable independent press, publishing vital voices. And one of the things that I really love as an author is the attention on the book as an artifact. Truly incredible books as objects, as images, as collaborations with the written word in their pages. And another thing that really helps Alice James to stand out is this notion of collaborating with the authors. In fact, in the editorial meetings, there's often this discussion of collaborating rather than just publishing poets. It's collaborating with poets, which is a way of really lifting up, highlighting, and supporting individual voices rather than trying to just select and pick, a certain style, a certain aesthetic. And it's a really remarkable press to be a part of. I serve currently on the editorial board, which kind of calls back to the collective nature of the press's origins. And the editorial board members are often made up primarily of Alice James authors who are helping to select 1 to 3 books for the Alice James Award each year. It's a great way of collectively bringing our energy into promoting new voices as they join the press. And it's really an honor to be able to have this crossover with Alaska Quarterly Review as well. There are many other authors also published both in Alaska Quarterly and with Alice James. And I'm excited to represent both of these beautiful presses. I'm going to kick off my reading with a poem that was published recently in Alaska Quarterly Review and is, in fact, the opening poem for my forthcoming collection, If Nothing. And I'll say a little bit more about this collection after this first poem. And this is called On the Condition of Being Born. As you were then, as you were at the moment of your first breath, outside of the mother, good before you knew any other way to be. Who can remember such a time? I rely on photographs to ply the memory. The first son cut out of my wife, the second pushed straight into my hands in the back room of our small rented house. Both bearing the same unowned goodness, bright as the noon sun in summer. It hurt to look straight at it and stayed in the eye like a wound the brain was trying to understand or undo. Maybe it lasted an hour, maybe 3 days or 3 weeks. I don't know that it is the same in every case, but what if being human didn't mean we had to fuck this up? I've been wanting to ask questions there are no answers to, the kind that might elicit only a in response, or a hymn in such cases, as though song could shed light upon such inquiry. Maybe if it was a wordless hymn, the melody could reach back into what held us before we were broken into different lines. Source, as in the mother's mother. Doesn't it feel good to lay on the earth? I mean, actually lay down in your day clothes, face against some grass, to just lay there and for a moment stop pretending you are separate from it. Stop pretending you didn't come from it and won't go back, eyes open or closed, thinking or not, the negative charge of the very ground taking up all the excess voltage you didn't even know you had. Really grateful for Alaska Quarterly Review publishing that poem, and it's exciting to me that it opens up this new collection, which in fact for me is a really vulnerable, raw, and painful collection of poems that really dive into addiction, into sobriety, into struggles with mental health and impacts on family and relationships. It's been a long journey working through life and then having that life come into poems. And these next couple touch more into some of the lived experiences of addiction. This first one's called What Luck. I lived again, wrecked, hungover, swerved in the dark from river back to bunk and never hit a tree, never was pulled over when my only tongue was swamp. Locked my keys in the trunk in a thunderstorm, done hotboxing the Cimarron with can't remember, car halfway in the road, aura of blunt, pungent as roadkill skunk. Always made it home, always stumbling thick-tongued, lucky if I didn't get the spins, mumbling if I had to speak, numb thing dumb in the truest sense. Floor was floor and I was on it, gone wind and away, also stone. Somehow sang, even undone. Almost alone, even throned among future tombs, I lived. The coal of my heart on a slow burn, no time to lose, no such thing as time, eyes tuned to the lack of light, skull locked tight, crowned alive, the king of lost keys. This one is called At Midlife, Trying to Recall My 20s. You ever feel like your soul is twisted up in a funny knot you don't remember tying? Some shit must have gone down while you were blacked out and moving about the world, some lowly worming likely, i.e., inching closer to any interesting woman just to see if you might be lure enough to light the want in her eyes, i.e., practicing your subtle magic and then going about another day as if nothing happened. Uncork some spirits and collaborate. Smooth out some of the kinks in your heart sleeve. Unravel if you must. Daylight is another world, and for now, the night is doing you all kinds of favors. Lick a cheek and go wild, you godless scrap. Mount the escarpment for a better view. Forget the why of the ascent and cling with your life to the smallest holds. Don't ever downclimb. Don't you dare give regret an inch, even if that scramble to the edge almost kills you. I'm going to close with one more poem, and the poem touches on this right away. But for me, this book, among other subjects, is really a book about shame. It's about, the deep wounds of the self, but also those caused to others, and the heavy burden of shame carried in really reckoning directly with these acts of taking responsibility and accountability. And so this poem closes out the collection, and it's called And Then. And then I took off my shame like a dress made of light, like a dress made of the self-spun cocoon. I was not beautiful. It was not about beauty. Beneath my shame, the body was a raw, red thing, untrained in acceptance. But the air was delicate and cool as a mother blowing gently on a burn. I had lived so long in the fabric, I thought it my skin. I had forgotten how new anyone forgiven can become. Thank you very much.
Well, next up, we're going to have Ira. And Ira Sadoff is somebody that I've followed for many years. His bio that I'm going to read is very short. His productivity is very long. And so this bio may not do full justice to his collective works. Ira Sadoff is the author of 8 collections of poetry, most recently Country Living, Alice James books, and True Faith Boa editions. He's published a novel on coupling, The Ira Sadoff Reader, and History Matters, University of Iowa Press, a critical book of poetry and culture. He's widely anthologized and published in magazines and journals. And Ira's awards and honors include the George Bogan Memorial Prize from Poetry Society of America and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. Over to you, Ira.
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to read from my Alice James book, Country Living. And it was helpful when Matthew mentioned his project for his book, was helpful in listening to the work. My project for Country Living is continuing to work on a lifelong project, which was simply to try and find the relationship between our personal lives and the culture we live in, and to investigate and interrogate those questions, to try and find a place and a sense of relation in a country that doesn't welcome that unfortunately welcomes the gulf between the personal and the social. And I'll also read a poem that I published in the Alaska Quarterly a number of years ago. that I still love, and I'm very happy to have appeared there. And then a new poem since Country Living. I never needed things. I never loved a shiny car, longed for the Azores, cashmere sweaters to make life matter more. I don't need that great Cabernet, though Chateau Montelena sends me back to a pond, a vineyard picnic. The woman I love, she's a different story. I always saw my family life as a sinkhole I tried to climb out of. But more, it was a vacuum, a grave that needed dirt to fill it in. So stuck was I only wanted to tag along, to hold on to someone for the ride. I'm still not sure how to conduct myself. Does anyone? So many selves craving to be seen and cared for. Once in a while, I drive to a mall to peer in shop windows to see what the excitement's about. A mother tries a dress on her daughter. A young man chooses between TV screens. They seem at home here. Sometimes I think their joy is sensual. They find little gems in the earth shining. I want to take home their expressions, wear them for a while. Here's one with a grandiose title, Self-Portrait with Michelangelo. I knew him very well. In the Star Theater of Rome, New York, I paint ceilings on the ladder to heaven, where the air is thin. After a few brushstrokes, I sit on the top rung to savor the figures of light and shadow on screen. I want to save them, but also send some to islands where they can't beguile or terrify. It's a revelation to come out of the theater, so absorbed by their voices and grimaces, these acts of creation, translucent as we are, substantial and eternal, a state of mind the body can't kill off, as when Liza's away on Guadalupe, news to herself only. I conjure her, sketching a waterfall, eating cassava and Christophine, hoarding perfumes and scarves in Porta Pietra. She's all flashes and cloudbursts. There's infinitesimal movement between the frames, so you can't register the changes. I call her Liza, so you're attached to her, and the name Liza. She has reddish brown hair and green eyes, smiles too much, and loves to swim too close to sharks. I don't want her swallowed up by life itself, because she's a complete stranger. I'm endlessly curious. Isn't that love? Knowing and not knowing, framing a gesture to make her familiar. I make everything up. Her jasmine scent, the delicate powder on the screen of her forehead. But how can I paint the streets and their screens to come back to earth with the darkness it deserves, where I live with my ordinary friends, the divine? Dies Irae was a poem written during the Iraq War, and it translates as the angry gods. It seems like the gods are angry a lot because there's hell to pay on this earth these days. It's also a musical term. It's part of a requiem. The inspiration for it was Verdi's Requiem there's a mention of Don Carlos, which is an opera by Verdi. So the context of the poem is that war. I suspect it's the Dies Irae that gets me going, shaking a fist at the gathering storm clouds I use as a symbol of the sky's a rotten apricot in my pocket. Just because the gods made us weave through traffic, my fellow countrymen think it's fine to turn the oak into a parking lot, to turn a hillside to a dog on a leash. The requisite trumpets take me to the war now. The really delight in music is unspeakable, the way it drills little spells inside you. The Vienna woods are there, a shabby apartment in Prague with a wooden slab for a bed and a giant cockroach to sing to. So why do I need words too? A garbled shoebox of sentences to poke through, a few figurines that sit on the bed, injecting me with their panic attacks. There they are, cutting themselves in the mirror, singing an aria from Don Carlos. And if you don't know what they do to each other, look it up. Look into their faces. And the last poem I'm going to read is a poem that I wrote very recently, in the last few months. I think it's finished. It's an elegy for one of my dearest friends, Jane Mead, who was also an Alice James author and just a wonderful human being and a lifelong friend ever since she was my student at the Iowa Writers Workshop in 1986, I think it was. It's called Heartbreaks for Jane. When you love a person, a country, a game of Scrabble, the world says, just keep flailing. I've got other work to do. Not true. The world says nothing. If there were a merry way, the world would go on it. The waitress didn't hear your order. You might as well stop singing, because when you were light and airy as angels, compliant and faith-bound, you could still be shot full of holes in the schoolyard. As for the little lies that crushed you, as if under the wheels of a car, those yelps, nobody hears your pleading, even if they'd have to go, even if they had their go at love. Forget it. It's no big deal. It's your own fault. Wrong from the start. Or, under its breath, let them keep drowning. Let the gas sizzle the earth. God invented days at the office, doodads, scandals, loud music, gossip, kitchens in need of repair, just to keep us safe from love. Our attention can drift, as in a long marriage, or a long day, or a familiar tune. There's a trace of joy in that music, like a few wisps of hair that fell over her face when she was happy. Startled, as we all are, when awakened, or when life is shaken out of us. The lion with the hyena in its mouth, or less dramatically, the key given back to the owner. So, after all the false alarms, visits to emergency rooms, weeks in bed in the dark, after we prepared a speech for the funeral, she went on to live a while, even if our hearts were bound to be broken again. She wanted a ride in the country, any country, just to feel another brush with the air. Thank you.
Ron, you need to unmute.
Okay, thank you, Ira. That was beautiful. And our next and final reader is Amy Dryansky. Amy is the author of 2 poetry collections, one from Alice James, How I Got Lost So Close to Home, winner of the New England, New York Award, and Grass Whistle Salmon Poetry, winner of the Massachusetts Book Award for Poetry. Amy's poems are included in several anthologies and appear in a variety of journals, including Barrow Street, Harvard Review, New England Review, Orion, The Sun, Tin House, and the Women's Review of Books. She has also received fellowships and awards from the Poetry Society of America, Massachusetts Cultural Council, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. Amy teaches creative writing, currently as the James Merrill Visiting Poet at Amherst College. Over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for inviting me to read, and thanks to Alice James. It's great to read with Ira and Matthew. I'm going to start with a poem that was published in a recent issue of AQR that is important to me as a way that I sort of explored my growing understanding of my eldest child, who's trans. And I guess the only question is just, I'm hoping people remember what a God's eye is. I don't know if kids still make those things with the sticks and the yarn and all that. So that's all you really need to know. It's called Getting Rid of the God's Eye My Child Made, for Tovi. Except it looks more like the eye of Sauron or the snake in God's garden than any eye I imagine a God would have. If I ever imagine that, which I don't, because if I think of God, it's as photosynthesis, fractals, migration, light on water. And my daughter is no longer my daughter because she's chosen they, or was chosen, made that way. And they are fluid, the way my God is fluid, one thing slipping gently into the next, one element making room for another. The way it's hard to say exactly when it stops being night, or if teal is blue or green. And the eye they made when they was she is a half-hearted effort at obedience. Sticks and faded yarn arranged in concentric, vaguely rhomboid shapes. Some camp craft to prove to parents progress is made. This ersatz eye hung from a nail on our porch so long it became invisible, the way things do when we see them every day. Until today, when I took it down, tossed it onto the kindling pile. They and I will make a fire. We'll warm ourselves. And the next poem I'm going to read is from my book with Alice James, How I Got Lost So Close to Home. I think it's about as close to a seasonal poem as I'll get. Here in New England, it's not April, but it is sugar season. And you know that because you see the trees being tapped and you see smoke coming out of the sugar houses. So this poem is called Amber. Inside the sugar maple's locked branches, something clear has begun to come loose. It will be caught, held, plied with intense heat. I pity the pink tips of those branches, their forced march in the dark before the clocks catch up. And I pity myself, swaddled bones scraping food from the same black pot. I hear the maples, their drip. I watch the sky above the sap house darken with ash, light up with sparks as the boiling continues into the night and the crude outlines of the bright windows beckon. I zip my high-necked dress up the back. Its straight silver teeth obediently close. I'm so cold, it feels like music. And I'm going to read 2 more new poems. Again, where I live, last summer, it would not stop raining. It just rained and rained and rained and rained. And I guess I needed something else to think about. So the title of this poem is also its first line. If it's raining where you are, and I'm pretty sure it is, I hope the drops land fat and wet, like rain, but better, fatter, wetter. I hope clouds are holding hard to the sky, not letting anybody push them around. No blowhards, hard blows, slam doors, glasses rattled in their racks. If it's raining where you are, I hope the sound of rain mixes with the sound of crickets. Their pitched drone contrapuntal to the rain's arpeggio, trills and scat, basso profundo. If it's raining where you are, I hope you've got insufficient shelter, a leaky, thatched lean-to, mildewed, dripping tent, damp edge of a bench beneath a graffitied plexiglass enclosure, bus late, nowhere in sight. I want you a little off kilter, akimbo. I want you to wish me your umbrella. We can stand in the dry circle, our own pale moon, and wait for a sudden gust to turn me inside out, flimsy ribs exposed, or a powerful gale to carry us away, you holding tight to my warm, curved handle. And let's see. Oh, I'm just realizing the last poem I read also has the moon in it. I know you're not supposed to write about the moon, but sorry. This poem was originally published in Waxwing, and I think it's what comes when you spend too much time reading Keats's letters. It's called Because the Moon is a Cliche and Not Exactly Steadfast. Moon, hearts, stars, flowers, all of the above. And by above, I mean where the stars are pinned, winking as they burn. Because I'm not allowed to talk to the moon anymore. Because the moon has amnesia, a sideways smile that always becomes a blind eye. The moon is a recurring mistake, history's dumb rotation. If you're going to touch me that way, I want you to look at me. If you're going to touch me, which we've agreed will never happen. But let's say I could address you. Let's say a rag-rich page lay before me, blank and white as your deckled skin, and I'm the one in the morning coat, a velvet collar from my chin to brush against, consumptive quill in my grip, blood spot on my handkerchief. What would I say to your vacant expanse? Something like, moon, this time take me with you when you go. Or, moon, are you really that cold? Isn't heartache sweet? It tastes of everything you ever wanted. The rain-soaked lilacs I pressed my face into as a child, knowing even then something I needed was there, unreachable. If you're going to touch me, I want you to drink the water from those lilacs. Thank you.
Well, that's wonderful, Amy. Thank you so much. And now we're at the part of our event where everybody will be on the screen at once. I want to put a question out to everybody for a conversation. Because I think the similarities in vision, in a certain sense, between Alaska Quarterly Review and Alice James' books makes this an appropriate question, because I think we both aim to foster and cultivate opportunities for empathy by overcoming barriers and presenting poems and their stories that make a difference, are important to hear, perhaps even be important to hear because the voices have been so long silenced. Okay, here's the question. That's the context. The world is in an increasingly fraught place. It seems like every time we have an event, it gets worse. I'd like maybe if you guys could address through your poems, either writing them, reading them, and the arts, are we truly making a difference? I believe we are, but because otherwise, but I wonder what your thoughts are about it, because the world is discouraging in lots of ways. But I don't want to give away my reason to think it makes a difference. I just want to hear what you folks have to say, and we'll just have this one question, and then we'll conclude this evening's event. Okay, so I'm going to throw it open, and hopefully we'll have all of you on the screen at the same time and not be spotlighted, if that's possible. And I'll stay on as well. All right, thanks. Anybody begin who wants to begin, unmute all of yourselves so that we have you all together unmuted. And now go for it.
I'll start it off just because I started it the evening, just kind of rolling back in that direction. Yeah, it's a beautiful question because, the world is overwhelmed right now with so many challenges, disconnections that we're all aware of, and just an incredible amount of uncertainty. And so I think there's, ways you could answer that question of like making a difference in what capacity. Are poems creating safe places? Maybe not. Are they creating, housing for people who need housing? Are they, breaking down barriers that are, holding up inequality and injustice again and again? Maybe not in terms of in laws and a societal level in that way, but I think they make a difference in our ability to live deeply and presently, to be with what is hard to be with what is beautiful to be with, even amidst times of extreme anxiety and despair. I think they make a difference in the moment to moment, in the day, and also over the course of life as we really have the chance to drop in. It may not happen all the time, but I know personally, whatever life brings up, there's often somewhere that I'm thinking of a specific line of a poem that somehow allows me to reconsider what I'm thinking or seeing or doing. I'm like one right on the top of my head right now is the Rilke's "No feeling is final." I have poems tattooed all over my arms that are these lines, the aphorisms, the callings. They change my life. They make a difference.
Mhm.
I've transitioned into a new career as a mental health counselor, and I sit with people going through extremely difficult things all the time. And for me, there are poems in the background. I don't always say them out loud, but they make a difference. And yeah, that's a little I have to say right now.
Well, I was moved by what you said, Matthew, and I was moved by your poems and Amy's poems as well. I grew up in poetry at a time where I thought it was the way to change consciousness and the way to change the culture. It sounds very grandiose now because it hasn't happened yet. And in terms of commerce, our audiences are smaller. We're competing with so many other art forms and non-art forms, media, and so on. And as a culture, we've become less intellectually curious. Florida is a great example of how that's true with banning books. But in terms of how it can change people's lives, well, the three poets here are examples of how it has changed our lives. And for many of the reasons Matthew's already given. But I think also that it models a way to be able to feel fully and to express feelings fully. And that includes empathy. It includes a sense of otherness. I mentioned that my project is about a sense of relation between self and other. And I think that all good poems do that to some degree. And they affirm the difficulty and the challenge of life, as well as the ecstasy of it. So it makes a difference to those people who read it and write it as a romantic in a classical sense. I wish it did more for the culture at large. But I think we play a smaller role now than we did when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, all of that. And, I do believe that the act of making art is important in and of itself. I do believe it's a political act. I do believe it's an act of resistance. And I think that's important. And I know that people reading poems, are often saved by them in really deep and important ways. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I think it is actually true. And I think it continues to encourage people, to make people feel seen and not alone, and part of something bigger than themselves, connected to other human beings at a time when I think many of us feel really, especially after the last few years, felt so disconnected from other people. And then there are all of the other artificial disconnections that are happening, the supposed differences and the real differences. So, it's so funny you asked this question too, because I'm getting ready to teach two poems this week. One is Janez Smith's My President, and the other is a poem by Aracelis Girmay called You Are Who I Love. And they're both these sort of just love-filled anthems about like my people, the people in my neighborhood, my friends, my family, other poets. And RSLE says, I'll just read this tiny little excerpt. She said, "You are who I love, writing letters, calling the senators, you who with the seconds of your body, with your time here, arrive on buses, on trains and cars by foot to stand in the January streets against the cool and brutal offices saying, your cruelty does not speak for me." And I just said, like, every time I read that poem, I'm moved and encouraged, right? Every time I read Danez's poem, I'm moved and encouraged. And I don't want to minimize that, because we, if we're going to keep resisting, if we're going to keep doing the important work, right, we need that kind of encouragement and that kind of connection. So I think poetry is more important than ever. And I don't know about the rest of you, but people still are always asking me for poems, at really intense times of their life, right? Like at funerals, at birthdays, at anniversaries, at christenings, at whatever. They want a poem. Why do they want a poem? What is it about poetry that really bolsters people and makes them feel alive and connected in a way that other things don't? So I'm not giving up on it.
Well, I think that that's a good place to be. And I'll just add, I think Alaska Quarterly Review and Alice James' book are not giving up on it either, because we're convinced it makes a difference, and in all kinds of ways. And it doesn't have to be an act of resistance, because making the world larger for people, an entry is a revelation. It's not only an act of resistance. It's a revelation also about self and identity. It's also a record for later of who we are and where we're going. I could go on, but I won't. It's incredibly important. And I think one of the key things about Alaska Quarterly Review and Alice James Books is we are nonprofit in the true sense of the word, which means we're not driven by the commercial. That makes a big difference, by the way. That in itself could be called a resistance, because it's putting stuff out there that the marketplace does not definitely dictate. Okay? So the commercial stuff dictates a wave of things. The non-commercial, resistance sounds like, well, it's a conscious pushing back. No, it's a conscious awareness of values and what's important in life and what's meaningful. So I am just thrilled to have had the opportunity to meet the three of you in person tonight. I encourage our viewers and our readers to consider buying the books of our three poets. That speaks to a certain kind of maybe nonprofit, but nonetheless validation. Maybe consider making a donation to Alaska Quarterly Review and Alice James Books. And also, for the heck of it, consider subscribing to literary magazines like Alaska Quarterly Review and others. The reason is that we are there building the fabric and the scaffolding of American letters. Because as you go up the chain, no matter what they say, the commercial is far, far more dominant, and we'll be making all kinds of other decisions about what should be supported and what shouldn't be supported. So with that in mind, I guess I also want to do one more shout out. I want to thank Julie Decker, the director of the Anchorage Museum, for all these years of her support of our series, and also Carrie Salerno, who is editor-in-chief and publisher of Alice James Books, for making this event happen with us, or helping make it happen. And so for that, I'll say goodnight until the next time. And I hope our poets will stay on just for a minute after we sign off the broadcast. Okay, now for everybody, a good night, and until our next event. And thank you.